Hey, what's going on? Welcome to Cleave to Antiquity. My name is Ben, and today I'm joined by Craig Truglia. What's going on, brother?
I'm doing good. What's your title now? Are you Catechumen Ben? What should we call you?
Yeah, just Ben. Just Ben is fine for now.
Mr. Ben, it's great to be here.
Yeah, Mr. Ben, the guy, the normal guy. No.
We call you
It is
Uncle
kind of
Ben.
weird not being a pastor anymore. I feel bored a lot more. I'm like trying to read more books. I'm trying to fill my time with stuff because usually it's like nonstop. I'm getting phone calls, texts, or I'm running to the church and helping with stuff. It's an adjustment for sure.
Well, God bless you for having a drama-free marriage.
Yeah, that's true. That is a blessing. So I appreciate you coming on the show. So for those that are tuning in, the way that this is going to work, we'll do a little bit of a conversation before we jump into the Q&A. But when we do Q&A, I'll announce it. Just if you want to go ahead and start asking questions, you can. Just put a Q in front of it, and I'll go ahead and I'll star your comment. We'll get to it once we get into that section. I'm going to be going through them by order that we receive them. So the first one will get answered and so on and so forth. If you want to skip in the line, you can send a super chat. It supports the channel. And also I'll focus on inquirer questions because those I want to make sure get answered. So if you're an inquirer, preface that in your question so I know where you're coming from. Instead of somebody that's like, all right, I'm going to ask a gotcha and we'll address those, but I want to get to the inquirers first.
I'm fine with gotcha. Whatever your audience likes.
Yeah, there you go. So, your book is getting some attention lately. You want to talk about that a little bit before we dive into Q&A?
That surprised me. I live under a rock, right? I live under a rock in Syracuse, so I wasn't aware that Dr. Joshua, I'm going to butcher his last name, Sijuade, some time ago on Academia released an advanced chapter of his upcoming book, and it's like 150 pages. It's pretty much why he thinks Orthodoxy is right philosophically and historically. It's pretty interesting, and for two reasons. One, because this is an academic writing it. Not everything an academic says is right, but that's not the point. Someone learned making observations, so they have a certain way of approaching these things. But the second thing I found so interesting is no matter whether you agree or disagree with him, he does give a very long survey of church history, and it's free. So you're almost kind of dumb not to download it. But of course, buy my book. But point is, you could also get a kind of the Cliff Notes version of my book in that chapter, which, it's kind of humbling to kind of see that as an author, that someone else takes it, condenses it, and makes use of it. And so that was fun to see. It was also fun to see the former church history professor at Jordanville. He's now out of the cathedral in London. He also gave a positive view of my book. So this has been a good week for Rise and Fall of the Papacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, don't forget, I put a little comment on there. I said, "Great book" or something like that on X.
It all started with our show. And then I think the Muslims in the prayer room must have pushed it over the edge.
Yeah, there you go. That's what it was. No, I think it was my very obscure comment on X that really kicked things off. No, I'm just kidding. It was viewed by like 12 people.
It's like you step on a mosquito back in time. The butterfly effects are amazing, so that you never know.
Yeah, right. All right, so it's funny. All right, yeah, let's dive into the Q&A section. So again, guys, if you want to ask questions, put a Q in front. I'll go ahead and I'll start starring these now. We'll pull them up, and then Craig will answer them as they come in. Let me go ahead and star the ones that we have now. Casanthus, clarify what your contention is on against the Donatists. I think you're probably confused about baptism or something. All right, let's see. All right, let's go ahead. Lax Ducks. Cleve, when will you stop being mocked by your Orthodox guest? First, it was David Chadrick Harry, then Chad Bob, now Craig Chad Ruglia. That's too much. Chad Ruglia. You got to come up with a shorter Chad name. And then Chad Ur. Oh, man.
Chad Dyer.
It's over. It's over, dude. I'm never going to recover.
I'm grateful someone out there considers me a Chad.
There you go. Well, you got the picture for the thumbnail. It makes you look like you have a very square jaw. So you're like, You
Oh, I
know?
didn't know it's a thumbnail. So okay, well, you're doing good work. That's what's pushing me to the edge.
Yeah, there you go. Next time I'll do a Photoshop thing where it's like, I'll be like, or an AI thing. It'll be like, make him look like Duke Nukem. No.
That takes me back. That's more
All
of a
right.
Half-Life guy.
Oh, there you go. All right. So Chrysanthus, how does the Eastern Orthodox explain the writings of Apathius from Against the Donatists Book 2? I guess you're saying you're talking about some of the jurisdictional, how we receive converts. Why is that not Donatism?
Well, depending on what the commenter is trying to get comment on, whether St. Optatus' views of the papacy, his views on baptism, maybe I'll just give an overall observation of the book and people could do their own research. It's not very long. You could kind of read it in 2 hours. So like you don't need to watch the 3.5-hour stream on St. Optatus. It's even though it's 5 books, they read pretty fast. So I recommend people to read it. That said, St. Optatus was writing from what we would call now the Orthodox Catholic Church against the Donatists, which were schismatics, which in every other way would have looked like Orthodox Catholic Christians. The difference between denominations then would have been much visually different and much closer. And really the crucial difference they had was a different hierarchy. And the justification for this different episcopal hierarchy was that the Orthodox Catholic side invalidated their sacraments and orders by permitting the repentant clergy that had apostatized to return to their former jobs. So at first glance, people like bashing the Donatists, but if they were people now were alive then, they'd probably want to be Donatists. If there's an X then, it would be more popularly Donatist. And what do I mean by that? You got to empathize the fact, like I could see you saying, oh yes, if you repent, the church is a hospital for souls, right? But do you want that person who sacrificed to idols going back and being your priest or bishop? I mean, we have to remember what Donatism was, and most people's inclination would be Donatist to begin with. Like, I don't know if that guy should get his job back, but the church has universally affirmed that no, people, they repent, they serve whatever penance is appropriate. This is not a deal breaker. The holiness of the sacrament and the holiness of the order does not depend upon the holiness of the individual. And I think deep down, the importance of this is, yes, it's terrible to have people that fall into great sins. In our own lives, we fall into lesser or greater sins. But how about the sins we don't know? Because the people often that are the most self-righteous have the worst skeletons in their closet. And so you could have all these allegedly righteous clergy who invalidated their holy order and invalidated the sacraments like baptism or the Eucharist by their unholy lives or private heretical opinions. And we can see that's a very dangerous road to go down on, because then you would have no assurance of anything in the church. And so the church, rightly, starting the days of Tertullian and then, with the Novatians and the Donatists, has always come against the rigorists. It's not because the rigorists are stupid and have a good opinion in some respects, but the ramifications of that rigorism really undoes Christ's salvific work in the world. It makes salvation depend upon the holiness of mankind. And if we got to depend upon that, we're in major trouble. So now, having said that about Donatism, in short, the view of baptism, that you would have to then rebaptize someone simply because they're baptized by someone who's not holy, doesn't work, right? Like, that's part of the same problem with Donatism. With the holy orders, the question is how Optatus defends his orders, and amongst doing this, he criticizes the Donatist Bishop of Rome vis-a-vis the Orthodox Catholic Bishop of Rome. And that discussion oftentimes gets taken out of context by apologists and whatnot. And I'll just sum up very quickly. Essentially, St. Optatus says all non-schismatic bishops are successors of Peter, and all schismatic bishops have set up a cathedra or a bishop's seat, a second altar apart from Peter. And so that cuts them off from the original apostolic succession. And so people kind of miss that larger argument he's making, which is he views himself as a successor of Peter. He views Saint Cyprian as a successor of Peter. He doesn't view this as exclusive to Rome. And so it's kind of like this very narrow reading of the text where people view it's just about the Church of Rome and the Pope, of course, and not about the larger point he's making.
All right. I hope that answers your question. Casanthus, if you have any follow-ups, make sure to ask them in the chat. And then guys, if you want to send in more questions, put a Q in front and I'll keep starring them as we go along here. All right, Writer of Truth asks, do you think that one of the most important things for Orthodoxy in America, I guess today in modernity, is to have the bishops make all reception practices the same for converts, or make a single jurisdiction in America? So what do
By
you think
far,
about this?
single jurisdiction, because the canons are categorical on that, while the reception by baptism, there's varying levels of economia and acrivia, which are allowable in the canons. There's canonical diversity. And so it gives the bishop different tools, per se, to decide. Now, it doesn't mean economia could be lawless, right? We can't be baptizing people in ketchup or single immersion. There's the economia allowed by the canons has prescribed norms for baptism. I'll be attending a canon law conference next weekend, where one of the speakers there will be giving a canonical discussion on reception in the church. So it's a very interesting topic, but I think people fixate too much on both sides. As long as it's not completely lawless, we should accept that it's acceptable on some level. You could say one's preferable and one's more prudent than the other, but as long as it's canonical and not lawless, I don't see the issue and why people should be so divisive over the question. Now, the problem with jurisdiction is that the canons are very specific about this, and it creates sort of disciplinary issues. If I don't like what my priest is teaching in my local church, I could church shop like a Protestant. And now for a Protestant, what we have in American Orthodoxy is actually very useful in some respects, and it makes it less of adjustment. They could pick the parish best for them. But this is really not true in most of global Orthodoxy, and not true historically. And in many respects, we need to approach where we attend almost like a marriage. There's commitment there. And if people just go where whatever's easier, they don't help build and improve things. I've heard the argument made, oh, well, if we have a single jurisdiction in America, it's going to be terribly liberal. It's going to be mostly Greek, like Greeks are bad, or whatever. And in the short term, they'd be right. It would be very Greek and it would probably be very liberal. So I'm not even going to say they're factually wrong. But remember what God says about tithing? He essentially says, put me to the test, right? Do the right thing, give the money in tithes, and just watch and see what happens. That's a very loose paraphrase, but essentially God says that do what's right and then leave to him the consequences. And I feel that would be the right thing to do here. We know we should have a single jurisdiction. The Council of Crete 2016 put 50 years, at least at something, 2.5 generations to kind of get this done. We should be making the rumblings of seriously doing it. There's push and pull, bottom up and top down. I do think we need a single jurisdiction ultimately.
There was an inquirer in here. Let me see. Hold on. Okay, here you go. I cannot pronounce that name, but question. It's good to see you guys. Presbyterian Inquiring Eastern Orthodox. Please give me some books or resources to look at. I'm from Pakistan. It's difficult to find an Orthodox church here, but I'm moving to Hamburg, Germany.
There we go. So starting in Pakistan, there's a lot to get started on the internet, and it depends on your level. And let me pick something that's safe and everyone can gain something from it. And that would be read the longer catechism of St. Philaret of Moscow. It has pan-Orthodox acceptance. Every patriarch in the day, including himself, not a patriarch, but a metropolitan representing Russia, accepted this catechism. It's the most modern pan-Orthodox catechism. And everyone learns something from it. I read it again, I'll learn something from it. So how could you go wrong with something like that? Very scriptural, very useful. If you want to do a deep dive and increase the power level of theology, the easy one is Exposition Orthodox Faith by St. John of Damascus, which is not a super long read. If you can't deal with all the philosophy, start with book 2 instead of book 1, and just finish 2, 3, 4, and you'll get a lot out of it as well. Of course, there's many great books which you might have less access to. I know full well missionary work in Cambodia that sometimes it's hard to get physical resources and physical books. But anything from Father Daniel Sijuade, like Law of God, is very useful for someone beginning the faith, and you will walk away with something no matter what your learning level is. And so that's the best sort of book in order to really understand theology. But the prayers, have a prayer book. You can get the prayers online and read the Lives of Saints every day. Prologue of Oak Reed once a day, 365 days a year. You'll be a different person after those 365 days. You're stupid if you don't read it.
All right. Jeremiah asks, are you going to do any videos on the Assyrian Church of the East? And are you going to do any more Oriental Orthodox debates?
I mean, those are good questions. I might do a longer treatment of Assyrian canons with Subdeacon Daniel Kakish. We spoke about that. I've read all the canons from the 5th and 6th centuries, and he has considerably more after that. And I'm very interested in canon law. It's a dry topic, but luckily I'm the guy who finds it interesting. So eventually, I think, but I wouldn't hold my breath. We were at least 6 months out from something on Assyrian canon law. I might do a defense of the authenticity of the Synod of Dadisho in 424. But I already actually kind of covered that with Chillstream, Subdeacon Daniel. I might do it in more detail. I do have a video coming out next week. It's already recorded, which is very interesting, on a Coptic Orthodox bishop, Metropolitan Bishoy, he's considered a saint by many Copts, and he died in 2018. And he used the terminology two continuing natures. He was willing, and he also said that Chalcedon was not conceptually Nestorian. So he doesn't agree with Chalcedon. He doesn't like how they did it. But he's at least man enough to say, yes, Chalcedon was not actually overtly heretical. They did heretical things. This is more of his argument. And so this video that will be coming out will discuss his comments and kind of do a deep dive on monothelitism and diothelitism from a perspective people probably haven't seen before, in a way that's very accessible and very patristic. And so I do think it's something people find interesting, because it's not really an apologetic video. It's not about why, or polemical. It's not polemical. It's not about why Oriental Orthodox are wrong. That's not the topic of it. It's really more about, let's talk about why we're right. And if you agree with us, great. It's more like that. As for debates, I think that I'm becoming, as I get older, more careful with what debates I'm going to pick, because I just don't want to get irritated with juvenile behavior. And so I'm sure Subdeacon Daniel and I will have a future debate. If I were to say what topic it may be, maybe on whether their church is canonical or not, which I think is the big question. They began as a parallel jurisdiction, and their own hagiographies admit that they violated the canon. So it seems like a pretty uphill battle for them to argue, and it becomes almost a circular logic. They would have to argue, well, we had to violate the canons because we had no choice because of how terrible the heresy was. But to make that argument, you have to already have the presupposition you're correct to begin with, right? So we already have these debates that maybe they're not correct, back and forth, but those debates, they have to 100% win those to even argue that their church is canonical. So that I find that very interesting. Hopefully Subdeacon Daniel and I will get that done at some point, but I'm totally spitballing here. We never even talked about it. We have a very open communication, and we go, oh, that sounds cool. Let's just do it. So I could see that happening.
Yeah, the last one was kind of interesting. I thought that was a good showing, especially I think you presented a very strong case in your debate against Agen. I thought it was those types of debates, I think for the normal person, are kind of hard to follow, but I kind of noticed Agen was doing what I did in one of our conversations when we were talking about Mariology, and you're like, you can't selectively choose the scholarship that explicitly agrees with you, even if it's like kind of fringe, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think those are interesting conversations. I'm glad that one was had.
It
Let's
was a
move on
good
to this.
debate, and it's kind of a shame that there was an appreciation for, well, this actually worked, and let's keep this going. Let's keep a respectful communication going. I think there might have been, on the internet, people don't know your tone. So like,
Sure.
I'll say this to be charitable because people cut these things up, and the idea is not to start a fight with agent. But like, I remember my son was jumping on my lap like all Saturday morning. I was like really trying to rush to translate the Syriac with AI, and I put up the first thing going, if I'm wrong, someone's going to point it out, so at least we get the answer to this question, right? Sort of like there's wisdom in many counselors. And I think 5 hours later, was I in the that day wasn't the Science Museum. I forget where it was, my kid. But the point is, I had both Subdeacon Daniel and also one of the Syriac scholars have been on my channel, both read it so I don't have to worry about what the AI said, and was able to at least give a firm answer to this question. And somehow, like, my good faith was interpreted as like some sort of horrible insult, and it kind of like
Yeah.
blows my mind. And I don't think I think it's because people can't read tone, or they're not listening for it, So I think if we're more charitable with one another and try to see, like, even if someone disagrees, they're really trying to get the bottom of truth and deal in good faith, we could have better debates and discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, I mean, the internet's the internet. It's gonna happen no matter what. There are people out there that think that I'm rude. I'm pretty charitable guy, I'd like to think. All right,
You haven't
David.
been Orthodox long enough. You'll become more of a jerk.
Oh, okay, great. It's a part of the process. Perfect. All right,
It's part
David
of the
asked.
spiritual warfare. You have to resist it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. All right, so when Peter says that we partake of the divine nature, Protestants will say this is simply sanctification. How would you counter that point, good Protestant?
My gosh, I think that's a very hard passage of scripture, and I can't do justice of it. I could say that Saint Gregory Palamas takes I'll say a peculiar reading, but without a negative connotation. That, because sometimes feces could pertain to energies depending upon the context and the point of what the writer is using. Because the word feces at its core really doesn't mean nature per se; it means origin. We use it as nature because it's like it comes from the Greek word for like a root on a tree, right? So if that's where the root begins, and what's that root belong to? It belongs to whatever that plant is. So it's like genus. And so, like, I could see a Roman Catholic reading that passage and say, well, a particular divine nature must pertain to like God's essence, because we often use nature to be to mean the word essence. The word nature also could pertain to God's person, because sometimes feces could speak of an individual, being that they have an origin and everything. And so, like in my Job commentary, that's the reading I take. I view that the passage in isolation is vague enough where in reality, I don't think anyone just on hermeneutics alone could really make a convincing argument over against anyone else. As an Orthodox Christian, this is where I would rely upon sacred tradition and the larger teaching of the church, instead of really using that as a proof text, because it really is too vague to weigh in some of these polemical questions, I feel.
And I feel the exact opposite. Use it anyway.
There you go. You're entitled to your opinion. Why not?
Yeah, Agnes, if you wanted to ask a question, put it in the comments and I'll start. But thank you for supporting the channel. Johnny says, I'm very new to the Orthodox Church, but I have a great fondness for the veneration of the Theotokos. Why is this absent from the Protestant Church?
I think it's almost like I think the real reason is spiritual more than anything, because when you look at the actual historical origins, the Protestant Reformation, and what Luther's concerns were, and even like what Calvin's concerns were, what a lot of these men's concerns were, there was nothing like specific that required them to really not venerate saints per se. I suppose in some respects it makes it easier to have a Protestant soteriology and to reject the Roman Catholic false doctrine of indulgences if you just make the saints totally immaterial, right? Because, the treasury of merits is the merits of the saints and of Christ. But being that, like, quite frankly, indulgence theology is pretty darn, what's the word? It's arbitrary ultimately, right? Like, you don't need any saints' merits for a plenary indulgence from the Pope to work. Plenary means forgiveness of all temporal effects of sins categorically, that a Pope could mete out if he feels like it, because he doesn't have to. I suppose he could just not do it. And that's not even really sarcastic. That's really what their dogma teaches. Being that that's the case, the saints' merits are really immaterial because Christ already is infinite anyway. It's like infinite little. It's like a finite amount and on top of something infinite. So I really don't see historically why the Protestant Reformation had to dispense with the veneration of the saints. It seems to me just the real cause is spiritual. That when they started distancing themselves more and more from apostolic Christianity, and we were really becoming more and more worldly, not because Roman Catholic Church at that time wasn't worldly. I'm not a Roman Catholic apologist, not my argument. But if you look at like what Calvin was in ruling a city, and what how the Lutheran Church began with the princes choosing bishops, then the Anglican Church where the king became the head of this church. Magisterial Protestantism were all state churches. They were national churches, right? And so we have to really see the Protestant Reformation, if we're being impartial, as a sort of secularization of the Christian religion. And so I'm not trying to say that with negative connotations. I'm just saying that's what it was in its day. But if we could recognize what the fruits of that secularization are now, to the point where secularization is considered something so negative that's considered a pejorative, it kind of makes sense that all of a sudden you'd start losing some graces, right? Their view of veneration of the saints, of relics, their high view of sacraments. I mean, you read Calvin on the real presence. His doctrine of real presence is wrong, but he's very adamant about the real presence. He just doesn't like transubstantiation. He doesn't like how it's parsed. How do we get from someone really taking that seriously, or Luther, famously writing on a table, "This is my body," and refusing the compromise on the real presence, though he was, I forget, consubstantiation. He had a different parsing philosophically of how it worked. But how do we get from that to like it's, bread and grape juice? It does seem to me this is the result of just the secularization, and it leads to this distancing from historical Christianity. But I'm not an expert in the Protestant Reformation. I've only read a couple books on Luther back in the day and stuff like that. So there might be more going on there than I recognize, but that's my guess, being that I was asked.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to grab these. There's a couple of inquirer questions in here, and then I'll get back to the super chat. So don't think I forgot about you guys. I just want to make sure I get the inquirer questions while they're still in the chat so they can hear the answers. Let's see. Where is it at? Okay, here you go. Here's one of them. Protestant background, have been heavily battling between discerning Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I've been stuck for months. For someone stuck in this stage, what would your best advice be? Read his book.
Yeah, read my book.
Yeah.
While I think my book is actually very useful, because it gives like a whole survey of church history. It doesn't say here's why one side right, one side's wrong. It actually says, all right, here's the ecclesiology of Judaism and the earliest documents and of the explicit ecclesiology of the scriptures, and it kind of builds up, and you start seeing all this stuff interconnects. And I find that very useful. But the real answer for everyone is this spiritual. It really requires spiritual discernment. You need to pray. There's no shortcut about it. And it's okay if you take longer or shorter, I suppose, because I don't think God wants us making decisions based on like OCD, if that makes sense. That being said, too, you don't want to be an inquirer forever, meaning like always inquiring and never walking by faith. There's a point where you have to walk by faith and go, this is where I feel God's leading me and where I'm obedient. So I think pick a prayer rule and prayers that are before the schism, because then that way you get the ethos of before the schism. Read saints that both sides have in common, and spend some time doing that. Prayers that, and of course, continue whatever routine you have the reading the scriptures. And I think if you do that, you will find which side actually sounds like the saints and the prayers and the scriptures, and it'll be clear to you. I find a lot of people choose wrongly because they are looking for the most convincing sounding argument. And I think the scriptures warn against, going by this and that wind of doctrine, what itching ears want to hear. We really need to discern these things spiritually. The scriptures have a crucial role in this. The example always is the scriptures. The kind of patristic battles have always been between people already in the church and high level discussions, not historically with inquirers. That's the result of us being overly educated and underpaid for our educations. That's a kind of a modern problem. So I think approaching this as every other person has spiritually approached this for 2,000 years is a good way to go. But I would be somewhat open-minded that it doesn't hurt to read a book like Edgar Barr's or mine if that's your issue and you're fairly educated and are used to reading, books that are academic or quasi-academic. It doesn't hurt, but you can't do that at the expense that you are divorcing yourself from spiritual reading.
Right. Yeah, I think for me, well, I mean, obviously, I've done a lot of reading in both camps, and a lot of research and dialogues in both camps. But I think what it comes down to for me is which church has the ecclesiology of the first millennium. Which church looks like the church of the first millennium? Does this look like the church that Jesus Christ handed down to his apostles, and then the disciples of the apostles, and so on and so forth? Does this look like the church of the first 1,000 years? And if the answer is no on the Roman Catholic side, then it's got to be the Orthodox Church. And we could talk about Oriental Orthodoxy as well. But I've done that in several other live streams. If you want to go check those out, we did a good one with Dr. David Patrick Harry, and we're talking about the geopolitics of the Roman Catholic Church. So if you want to check that out, that was on his channel. That was a neat conversation. I don't get to talk about that too much, so that was kind of cool. But God bless you. Hopefully hopefully see you at Divine Liturgy one day.
I will add one thing to that, which is you need to believe your eyes and your heart to some extent. Not to the point you don't want to be so open-minded your brain falls out. That's not my point. But you have to believe your eyes, because I've noticed a lot of heresies are contingent upon don't believe what you see. Listen to this long list of argumentation. So for reasons not to believe what you see. Mm-hmm. So like there's a big blow up on Twitter this week over icons, and it's like, don't believe the icon with the prayer written on it. One person was literally saying, well, how do we know we pray to it? There's an icon with a prayer written on it. The only thing we're lacking is an instruction manual. And we get this like with certain Protestant apologetics. No offense, you as a former Protestant apologist. If anyone,
I'm offended, Craig. No,
it's the idea like, if you're going to argue that the early church was set up like a Baptist or even Presbyterian church, you have to believe what are you reading when they're talking about bishops and succession? And when we actually look at the archaeology of what these churches look like, it's like, it's hard to take serious, but the arguments don't believe your eyes. Mm-hmm. And, yes, you have to use your brain, but don't forget to use your eyes.
All right. So one more inquirer question, then I'll get back to the super chats there. SB Becca asks, is Father Josiah Schramm's book, Rock and Sand, good to read for me, a Presbyterian inquiring into Eastern Orthodoxy? Any other recommendations?
I've never read it. I feel when I began my worship at Orthodox Church in 2017, my wife and I felt, no offense, anyone trying to help us along the way, we almost got nothing but bad recommendations. If you're very heavily Protestant, a Lutheran wrote Light from the Christian East. I found it a pretty helpful introductory test, but we've gone a long way in Orthodox discourse since 2017, which is pretty humbling, where I think a lot of these entry level things really wouldn't hold water anymore. People have already by osmosis picked up more than what they're talking about just by Twitter feeds and stuff. And so I'm not sure. Being that I never read Rock and Sand, maybe that would have saved me a lot of trouble. But it's that's why I think the catechisms like St. Philaret's or Law of God from Father Daniel Sazoyev, incredibly useful. I wish I knew about that when I was first becoming Orthodox. It probably would have saved me from my ecumenist stage. And in the beginning, I didn't think Orthodoxy was infallible, right? It's not like I went into the church trying to defend infallibility or I wanted epistemic certainty. People could probably tell I'm more of the liberal leaning academic type. It was through serious reading and again, just being part of the services that I became more conservative and traditional in my mindset, not because that was my original inclination, but because that was what was most justifiable, I feel. So it's, but maybe Rock and Sand will get you there.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. They did a good discussion too. If you want to watch a live discussion of the contents of the book, they basically cover just about everything. If you're not the reading type, you can listen to that. I don't remember. You could probably just look it up, Rock and Sand. It's like 2-hour lectures on the book itself that he did. All right, DJ Robinson, can you comment on Sirach 42, 2-5 talks about not being ashamed of drawing blood from the back of a wicked slave? Is the Deuterocanon inerrant?
Oh no, I think he got me here. I think he
over.
got me. Now hold on to your seats, everyone. Did you know in the Torah it talks about slavery too? It talks about marrying the woman that was raped, that you have to marry her. Like, oh, what do we do with this? And we have to understand these things within the context of their time, with the institutions that exist in their time, and also not that slavery, for what it's worth, is a very inefficient mode of labor, and which is why I think I was taught by Dr. Eric Foner on the Civil War, who's a leading Civil War historian. He's got to be retired by now because that was 20 years ago. But even he said it's the whole free soil movement in the Civil War. It's not that there was so much they loved the enslaved African people and felt sorry for them. It was a difference of economic systems between North and South. And slavery was very clearly not part of the economic system that was prevalent in the North. And a lot of this was in response to Marxism in 1848. It's very interesting. I won't bore people more on that. But what I would say is slavery is a historical form of labor. There's no way of avoiding that. And so this is the world that most Christians, most Jews lived in. And these were the things and the advices given to how to navigate this world. And just like spare the rod and spoil a child, the idea is those under your discipline, should be disciplined. That's the point of the passage. The point of the passage isn't to justify slavery from people that inherit it by their race, which is a peculiarly American and Brazilian institution, right? Like that's not what it's about. But if you do have a slave, if you do have a child, you should discipline them through an effective means. And that's what those passages are about. And there it's saying, an effective means is something physical. Follow the laws in your local jurisdiction. But of course, you want to use the most effective means to help people do the right thing. I tend to think that, all I can tell you is as a parent, it's not spanking. It's through consistency and, and being a good example and teaching and firmness, though. You got to be firm. And here, when slaves were POWs, essentially, and things like that, maybe there was more writing on the line because that slave could poison you or kill you. How to make that person disciplined within that very dark world that existed.
Yeah, I think spanking your kids is necessary. That's my opinion, though. I can see it as, or it is an effective parenting tool. I think the scripture itself says, like, spare not the rod, or you hate your child. So, I mean, I can definitely see the wisdom. I'm definitely, I'm a pro spanker. I'm anti spanker. You gotta get the
It's
spankings in.
I'm not opposed to corporal punishment, and that's why even in a liberal state like New York, it's legal. All I can tell you as a parent, it's so child dependent what makes them tick and what works and what doesn't. And it's so situational. Like sometimes they get freaked out more by the really calm because they're used to you freaking out. So you go calmly, that was a real wrong thing you did right there. And that freaks them out. And sometimes they want the spanking because like they just want to be done with it. They need to know there's a consequences served, and that's that. Um, all the people I spoke to as adults, like I hated my parents like grounded me and stuff. Like they never said I hated I got spanked. It's only if I had an abusive, terrible parent that was just beating them for no reason. But generally people look back like, yeah, I got grounded. Like, you know what the worst punishment I ever had in my life? I was punished no dessert for 1 year, which is kind of an insane punishment. And it was because my sister put a marshmallow fluff sandwich behind the water cooler and blamed it on me. And they said, it's your fault. I'm like, I don't even know where the marshmallow fluff is. I don't have a marshmallow fluff sandwich. And so I look back and it was the injustice, the punishment that really bothers me
Yeah,
more than anything. I
that's
don't think
fine.
anyone looks back and at something that they justly were punished with and feel bad about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think even the stuff that I didn't deserve was helpful for me. Like my sister would always pin stuff on me all throughout my childhood that I didn't do, and I would get punished for it. I think it was kind of like, okay, life ain't fair, deal with it kind of deal. You know what I mean?
I don't know. No dessert for a year. That's pretty ridiculous for
Dude,
marshmallow fluff sandwich.
I remember when I was
Why would that even be a punishment if I had magical access to this marshmallow fluff?
yeah, there
Think
you
about
go.
that. It's just
Dude.
it's not rational.
I think the wildest punishment I ever got from my dad was usually I have to walk. When I was a kid, I would walk my sister home. We didn't live far from the school at all. It was
Mm.
like right a straight shot, just a sidewalk, straight shot to the house, done. Like less than 5 minutes. I stayed behind at school, and I had gotten like my first kiss. So my sister walked home with her friends. When I came home, I learned my lesson. My dad took the door off the hinges. He took the bed out of my room. So I slept on the floor for like a week for letting my sister walk home by herself, which I was wise because, it's kind of dangerous. I was just a stupid kid, but I remembered that. It was good.
You were taking your chances. So
Yeah, yeah. I took
I
my
remember those
chances.
days.
Oh man. Well, I was like, all right, he's not gonna be home. He'll be home later. Sure enough. Oh,
Oh
that's
my
funny.
gosh.
All right. So George says Monophysites and Nestorian church history is extremely sad, but their stubbornness on 25 now that we have Google Translate and phones is infuriating.
I guess just my overall comment is it does seem to me really at its core an ethnic schism. It's ethnic is somewhat our modern way of putting it. It was regional. There was people in Egypt and Syria in the periphery of the Roman Empire, and they kind of seized upon these theological disputes to exact leverage against the empire and to gain incremental independence against the empire. And so now we have what have become like clan-based loyalties and ethnic loyalties, like Copts are people and stuff like that. And their loyalty to their in-group is what kept them Christian now after how many years of Islam and everything.
Mm.
And so like you get into the modern era and you start seeing these major canonical problems, how the church was formed. They'll argue and argue vociferously how wrong your Christology is. And once you get to the end of that rabbit hole, like, yeah, two continuing natures. But we don't like that when you use the number two, it's bad. We can use the number two. And it's something where it's like, all right, I want to be respectful and know there's I as a convert and not from Egypt and not having family that were persecuted, don't have this like generational like investment where right or wrong, this is us. Like I get that and I respect that. But you also have to remember, like, people that aren't going to have that are going to find that way of arguing and that way of reasoning sort of aggressive and bizarre.
All right, now I'm going to go back up to the top here, and we'll start going back in order. IC asks, Craig, when are you debating James White on icons? Also, are you willing to debate Javier Perdomo on the canon or ecclesiology?
When it comes with James White, we were actually speaking this week, ironically. And so that might get done in a year about. Neither of us in a major rush. But it would be, the talks would be, it'd be an in-person debate. I won't say the venue, but it would be somewhere that would work for both sides and for where everyone has representation in the live audience. And so those talks are ongoing. God willing, it'll get done, And that being said, with Mr. Perdomo, I don't know if our views are kind of that different or not. I'm not opposed to a conversation. I don't know what I'm debating. I'm not opposed to a debate. As again, my main thing at this juncture is I don't want to debate someone that uses bad words, calls people names, doxes them. If you're a normal human being, I'm willing to have a debate. If you're going to be a jerk about it, then I'll let you debate the other jerks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think Javier's kind of normal though, right?
Yeah,
he's kind of like, so
yeah,
I don't think there'll be an issue with him.
Even out of the Protestants that were upset at my conversion, he didn't lash out at me publicly. So he's very polite. He'll save it for the private stuff. No, no, I'm just kidding. No, he's a nice guy. I like Javier. He's upset at me for becoming Orthodox, but he is very polite. I don't know if your views on the canon differ that much because he holds to a 2-tier distinction. So he still uses the Deuterocanon. So.
I think he admitted to ultimately cripping my arguments. So sort of like, what are we debating here?
Yeah, maybe ecclesiology would be the better debate.
Perhaps I would be very open to debate on, if I'm presuming it's maybe Presbyterian, that absolutely Presbyterianism is not the first century ecclesiology. Mm-hmm. I'd have the disadvantage because I'm published on the topic. So you kind of know what my arguments and sources already are because they're all published. But yeah, I'd be happy to debate that.
Yeah, Javier is a pretty nice guy. All right, let's continue on. How can God cause all things, know what the fruits of those things will be, including human decision via foreknowledge, and not predestine them eschatologically? Yep.
Well, how does he? All I can say is Clippy's the man. Clippy's the man. It's the larger question of predestination. The Orthodox answer is God chooses according to foreknowledge. And among the saints, I'd say, because even like St. Prosper Aquitaine kind of backs up a little bit on some things. St. Augustine gets kind of close to double predestination at some points. And I only say kind of close because even if, let's say, he says something that's double predestinationist in one work, to then oppose that idea upon everything he writes everywhere, I'm not willing to do yet. And I've just seen enough coverage of patristics being wrong where I will remain agnostic on that particular question. But I think ultimately speaking, people are trying to systematize something that is mysterious. Because, for example, if God was in the business of simply maximizing salvation, then everyone after they're baptized would instantly die, pretty much, right? Because then they never could sin, they can never fall away. Clearly, God does not allow that to occur. I like to think God's more about quality than quantity, right? So if so many people are going to fall away or never be reached, but somewhere down the line, this person that came from their bloodline becomes a Christian and a saint, was it all worth it? You might say yes, you might say no, but you know who knows the answer? God does. So right. I leave that to God.
Yeah, I mean, well, also I would say, isn't what is it? Is First Peter? Yeah, First Peter talks about chosen in accordance with the foreknowledge. Yeah, First Peter, the beginning of it. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the chosen sojourners of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, and the foreknowledge of God the Father, through sanctification by the Spirit, for obedience with sprinkling of the blood of Jesus Christ. May peace, grace and peace be yours in abundance. So, chosen with the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctification by the Spirit. I mean, you'd have to reconcile your view with Scripture, I would think. And that's always been the reason I held to a more, I guess, Arminian view historically. All right, let's see. Landon, I am an Orthodox catechumen with a question. Why is St. Isaac the Syrian venerated even though he died in the Syrian church?
I mean, this is a good question. And this is one, first reading Lateran 649, the introductions by Alan Booth. You start realizing like this is kind of like a bell curve where like derp, St. Isaac is an Eastern Orthodox saint. And then it gets to the middle, like, oh, well, in reality, he's this Nestorian. And then when you get to the top of the bell curve, like, oh, wait, scholarship actually recognizes there was some intercommunion started under Emperor Heraclius at that time. And so the question then becomes, well, how much of this intercommunion was St. Isaac part of this intercommunion? And ultimately, we don't know the answer to that question, but it's not ridiculous to say there's a real possibility that his church was in some sort of tangential communion with the Orthodox Church, which would mean he was part of the Orthodox Church in some way. We have other interesting characters like this in history, like Anthony of Padua, the beloved St. Anthony for Italians and Spaniards. And but his church was technically tangentially in communion with the Alexandrian church, and there wasn't a total breakdown. So could some saints make it slip through the cracks through these kind of like the very end of these persistent communions? And the answer is yes. So we don't have any reason to definitively say this is an example of a saint with no canonical basis within the church's ecclesiastical boundaries, right? Because that'd actually be going beyond the evidence. But that said, the real St. Isaac the Syrian was like a bishop for one whole whole year. So whatever his ecclesiastical views were, if you're going to say, well, most people were Nestorians, so we don't think he was maybe holding on to the Chalcedonian intercommunion. Well, how do you know that's even true? He didn't hack it out as a bishop. He went back to being ascetic. So we trust that this canonization is with good reason, and his writings are holy, and this is why we venerate him.
All right. DJ asks a follow-up. He says, my question about slavery wasn't a gotcha. I am a baptized Orthodox Christian. Is the Deuterocanon inerrant in Orthodoxy? I've heard different answers.
In short, the Deuterocanon is, I don't like the term inerrant, but I'll just use it so people not, I'm trying to like weasel out in some liberal way. Sure, it's inerrant. It's superintended by God. There's no part of it we're supposed to dispute or think is not true or think is not helpful towards salvation. And so I think the real difference is qualitative. We do have indications from certain saints, and also like I keep pointing people to the footnote to Apostolic Canon 85 in the Rudder, where it does specify there's a different quality to the revelation, and quality as in high quality versus low quality, quality as in superintended versus prophetic, right? We have scriptures that are thus saith the Lord. It's God literally speaking word for word. Then we have those, for example, like the Deuterocanon, which are superintended by God, but they're written through the agency of man. Like the end of Second Maccabees, the author even apologizes. He wished he could write a little better. Sorry, he didn't. God wouldn't apologize for how he writes, right? So is there the agency of man in writing the Deuterocanon? Absolutely. But that doesn't make it somehow like, full of error, right? We believe the Nicene Creed was written by man, but it doesn't have error. It was superintended by God. We view the work of ecumenical councils, all of our pan-Orthodox prayers, hagiographies. So we have this kind of broader view of inerrancy in that way. And so I think sometimes people are kind of approaching it through a Protestant lens, and that's what creates confusion.
It's your Protestant lens, man.
It is, because like you wouldn't in an Orthodox country even be talking about that unless you were having some sort of dialogue with a Protestant or a Roman Catholic. You'd be like, the hagiography says this is what happened. I just accept it. They wouldn't be like, technically hagiographies, they're not as binding as canons. Like no one talks that way, right? That's something where through debate in the West that they start divvying that stuff up, but you don't find that historically in Orthodoxy because the mindset's different.
Disciple of Korea. How does the thank you for the super chat. How does the Orthodox Church reconcile the
Call
intercession?
yourself whatever you want with $20.
Yeah, I guess. I guess so. How does the Orthodox Church reconcile the intercession of the saints in Hebrews 7:25 and 1 Timothy 2:5? Obviously, Revelation alluded to it. I'm curious to see what the argument is in these other verses. So I guess let's pull those up and read them, huh?
Well, like Hebrews 7:25 would be that Christ always makes intercession. 1 Timothy 2:5, I can't remember. Let me look it up.
For there is one God, there is another mediator between God and the human race. So no mediator besides Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's, let me just give like kind of the low IQ apologetics answer. It's like, it doesn't stop you from asking other people for prayer, right?
That's right.
But it's more than that, right? Like, yes, you should pray for God for healing, if you have cancer, but it doesn't mean you don't go to the doctor, right? And so if there's a healing saint, because sometimes this gets reduced too much in apologetics worlds, like I'm praying for Saint Pantaleon to heal me, which you could do, but you could say Saint Pantaleon heal me, say it nicely, of course, and he could do it because God's given him the grace to heal, just like we see. Is it Romans chapter 12 that talks about spiritual gifts? I know it's also in 1 Corinthians where there's healings, there's gifts of healings and teaching and hospitality and all these different spiritual gifts that saints are given in the church. We just think like God's the God of the living, not the dead. They still have those gifts after they die. So if Saint, you could ask Saint Peter to even raise the dead, technically you could ask a saint for anything that God has graced them to do. It would be God doing the work through the saint because it's his grace. Saint, according to human power, can't do anything. And so ultimately speaking, I don't think those verses really address the potential opposition that may be posed there.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see this. How do you heal after leaving your Baptist church, which thinks you're going to follow a different Jesus? Jesus plus everything else. I guess Jesus plus anything else. You have a false gospel, them's traditions of man. How do you deal with that?
It's I God will sort it out. I maintained friendly relationships with my Protestant friends, and I found that they more distance themselves because you find out it's a lot of friendships predicated upon what you have in common. Sadly, you get jaded as an adult when you realize a lot of people don't have a loyalty simply because I've known you for 20 years. And so, thick or thin, people aren't like that all the time. Be positive and, I'd say be conscientious of certain questions they might ask. They go, well, how do you pray to saints? You go, I pray an hour every day. When you pray that much, I'm praying more to God, and then you add it to saints too. It's not like I'm losing my connection with God. I have more of a connection with God. And so maybe to come out at it at an angle, maybe they're not expecting that's not argumentative, may be helpful.
Samuel asks, how could Cyril Lucaris be a saint in Constantinople, also an endorser of Calvinist theology?
Yeah, I have a whole channel. I have a whole episode on my channel on this question. So by all means, put Kyle Lucaris, Orthodox Christian Theology, and we get to a lot of nitty gritty on it. He's a saint for Alexandria. It doesn't look like there's been any official canonization with the EP. That said, the official answer is, he never really wrote those things. I don't know how historically defensible that is, but when they canonized him, that was the idea. So, you can't be like, well, how could he really be a saint? You could kind of take the kind of desperate reasoning that, they must have been right. The less likely historical case is the correct one. And I know that sound like, I want to be honest about that. I don't think there's necessarily shame with that because we do this with the scriptures a lot. Right? The scriptures might say, the city of Ramses. And some archaeologists might say, well, that city wasn't built until 400 years after the time of Moses or whatever. And we'll say, you know what? I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not going to immediately think the archaeologists are lying. I just think when better historical evidence comes out, it will ultimately vindicate the position of the scriptures, right? You might not have the evidence now, but you just have the faith that in time it will be vindicated. So Calocaris, if the whole Orthodox Church considers him a saint, then I feel he'd be vindicated, and not for Calvinism. That said, I personally don't view him as a saint. My jurisdiction doesn't officially recognize him. And this may be an example. If you read church history, there's certain figures that they call saints that they don't call saints anymore. So sometimes canonizations are something that require just like local councils, the whole church, to recognize we accept this or we don't. I don't think Calocaris will stand the test of time, in my opinion.
Steady asks, Craig, Dr. Sijuade gave you credit for his conversion based on the rise and fall of the papacy. Anything you wish to add for Roman Catholics, like papacy, not in the book?
I don't quite understand the end of the question, and maybe you want to translate that. But as best I understand, for those, I wrote the book because I noticed people so obsessed over the papacy question, and like there needs to be a better book than Denny's Anglicanism, because I read the ecumenical councils and the popes and a lot of these epistolary and canons, and I knew what the history books were saying were that they were presupposing papalism. It was like they were Protestants trying to show, well, the Pope ain't all that, but he's something, versus Roman Catholics, Pope's all that. And there was sort of like a lack of, well, you don't even see either of that idea in the first millennium sources. So ultimately ended up writing my own book to do that. And so I think the book is useful for a key dialectical reason, which is consensus-based ecclesiology and consensus-based epistemology. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because you realize, wait, this is actually literally talked about in the ancient sources, and these other things that we're arguing about aren't. Why is this the first book to talk about it? And the interesting thing is, Dr. Joshua actually says, Craig Truglia introduces to the academic discourse these two terms. So, it's kind of humbling to see now academic discourse saying, yep, this is terminology we have to be working with. And I'm the guy who invented at least consensus-based ecclesiology. I didn't invent the word consensus. That's all over the fathers.
You said he's asking for some bonus info about the papacy that didn't make it into the book.
Oh, there's always a lot of that, actually, because like I don't stop learning. Maybe not the same rate. I'm getting older and busier. But that said, there's certain things like with errata that I've done that I might make a longer errata, like minor things, things with translation that come out on the Eighth Council that I would touch up. But like there's different honorifics that didn't make in the book that will blow your mind. Like when St. Cyril of Alexandria was, what was it? The Pope wrote to him and said that he conquered the whole world and the whole world subject to him. Yeah, imagine that was about the Pope at the time, right? They'd be running away with that, but the Pope was writing that to Cyril of Alexandria. Yeah. There's stuff in the Synod of Dadisho where we see before the Pseudo-Samikian canons, we see an Assyrian version of the Pseudo-Samikian canons. It's very fascinating in that respect. So we have that as well, but there's going to be a kind of, I'll call sequel to Rise and Fall of the Papacy. I don't know when it's coming out because my co-author is for some reason really delaying. I don't think he understands how many people want to buy this thing. It's on the Council of Constable 920. It's the unheralded Ninth Ecumenical Council. I wrote the introduction to this book. It's a translation of that council. And it gets into, yes, the Pope at the time did accept essentially the Photian Nomu canon, because it had to do with the issue of fourth marriage. And we see the issue of fourth marriage in 10th century Italian canon law. So we have this sort of argument that potentially all Roman Catholic canon law fell off the rails after the 12th century. And theoretically, they could reform along the last acceptable line in the 10th century. which leads to very interesting things like with the Amoris Laetitia and stuff. Probably more liberal than people would want in that regard, but it does. The Roman Catholics might be able to reform their canon law because they kind of back themselves in this sort of weird corner with a lot of their social issues and stuff, where they get somewhat modernized by actually authentically adapting Orthodox canon law because they actually agreed to it in the 10th century. So hopefully that book comes out soon because it has a lot of stuff that's unpublished on that episode.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd be interested in looking at the Photian Nomo canon and some of those controversies. That would be interesting for sure. Cleve, Father Joseph Copeland, Divine Energy on PMP is a must listen. Hi, Craig. Well, thanks for the suggestion. If I have some time, I'll check it out. Let's see.
How do you get by with the last name Copeland anymore, though?
Yeah,
people ruin the word Cope. I feel sorry for Father.
Yeah. Like the meme. All right, let's see. Question. In the Orthodox perspective, did Christ take away our debt of sin? Can you explain propitiation versus penal substitutionary atonement?
Let me speak about this very simply. If you want the nitty gritty, I recently did a video called Orthodox Councils You've Never Heard of, which gets to the issue of the atonement, because the Orthodox do have a binding statement that doesn't allow for Calvinistic penal substitutionary atonement. We obviously allow for penal language, right? Christ paid the penalty of sin, but what is that penalty of sin? It's corruption, death, and the passions, right? So Christ voluntarily assumed corruption, death, and the blameless passions. Christ was tempted in every way we are, but without sin, as Hebrews 4:15 states. And so he's not like Christ assumed any sinful passions, but the blameless ones, which have to do with hunger and privation and pain, he did assume. And so what's the point of that? Christ, totally righteous, totally sinless, who didn't need to corrupt, die, not only because he's God, because he's sinless mankind. Adam didn't have to corrupt, die. He didn't have passions before the fall. Christ voluntarily assumed these things, and it's kind of like it's a universal illegal operation, right? So his whole life was an atonement. His life, his death, and his resurrection, because it then did the law of nature. You read the patristics, they talk about the law of nature a lot. And so I think a lot of arguments in the atonement kind of miss the mark because they're focusing on just one aspect of Christ's economia, his economic dispensation, his life with us on earth. And his life was an atonement, because when Christ was hungry, when Christ experienced pain before he died, that was totally unjust. He did nothing to deserve this, right? And so that was a payment for a penalty that we owe, because our corruption, death, and passions are a result of our sinfulness. Christ voluntarily assuming the penalties of sin undoes the effects of sin for those who are in union with Christ by faith, repentance, baptism, communing his flesh and blood, and partaking the sacramental life of the church. So as we could see, the atonement is this integrated whole. It was never meant to be kind of sliced and diced in some respect to be like just a moment in time, or because of what it is, it renders irrelevant or superfluous the efficacy of the sacramental life of the church.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. I like that takeaway. You said you did a video on that recently?
I did. It's called Orthodox Councils You've Never Heard of, because like a popular thing, you'll see people arguing, even like, they call them the Latinist or whatever.
Yeah.
Orthodox. I'm on neither side. So like for a while they thought I was a Latinist. Now the Latinists hate me. So whatever they are, I'm just trying to say the truth. All right. And sorry if it offends you. But that said, people will focus on the penal language and say Christ paid a penalty to the Father, but that's actually explicitly condemned by the Council.
Mm-hmm.
Christ sacrifices to the whole Holy Trinity, and this is based on one of the silent prayers, the priest of the cherubic hymn, because Christ is offered even to himself. So how's that possible if he's just offered to the Father? And so this gets into larger ramifications, because the same council then condemns vain philosophy. It condemns that we could base our doctrines just on philosophy or just on canons and things like this. It's because we have a holistic prayer life, the church, which to us preserves our doctrines.
Interesting. Yeah, let's talk more about that in private. Maybe I might want to, if you're open to it, maybe we do a video expanding on that subject, because it's very.
You know what? I'd be open to that, because I got burned years ago. Father John and I did a great video on all points, other than it mentioned Joshua Sijuade's book. And God bless Joshua Sijuade, but citing a book which from a priest and apostatizes is not so good, right? Just saying, it's not good for an Orthodox apologist. Nothing against Joshua Sijuade. I think he would agree it's not good for an Orthodox apologist.
Yeah.
And that said, I've always been meaning to correct the record per se, and I never got the opportunity. So maybe one day, God willing, we could do that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'll name it something scandalous, like against the Latinizers, and I'll have you like this.
I prefer not. I even said, like, I will debate someone on this, because I don't mind losing. I don't mind teasing this out. You know what I mean? I just don't think you could take this reductionist view of the atonement. And I find that ultimately speaking, people end up conceding without admitting they're conceding, because we've got an authoritative counsel on this question. You can't take a naked penal substitution view, as much as someone may want to, because it's, let me say this, because, my wife and I are missionaries. Penal language is much simpler in evangelism, and it's much simpler in explaining the atonement in a homiletic context. You've got an audience of people. They're not all theologians. They don't listen to any of our channels and do theology in their spare time. What did the cross do? Christ paid the penalty of sin. He paid for your sin on the cross. He died the death you're supposed to die. Right? It's simple, right? You get into trouble when you start saying that's all there is, right? That's the problem.
One moment, let me just send something in the chat. So basically what you're saying is, in the thumbnail of our video that we do together, that I title very scandalously "Against the Latinizers," I'm going to have to put you with huge muscles, putting Orthodox ensign in a headlock, rear naked choke. Yeah, I'm just kidding.
You might have to get someone else for that thumbnail.
Yeah,
for several reasons. I wouldn't be comfortable with.
All right, what is the Orthodox view on inerrancy? Can there be scribal errors? Is Scripture only inerrant regarding faith and morals, or everything?
I take the view of St. Maximus in Questions Thalassius, which is the Scriptures are infallible and inerrant according to what they're trying to communicate. So, what do I mean by that? St. Maximus says there's historical error in the book of 2nd Kings or 4th Kings, depending on your Orthodox versus Protestant numbering. And he says the point when they make a purposeful chronological error is to make you aware that there's an anagogical interpretation, or in other words, there's typology going on. You're supposed to go, oh, wait, I'm not reading this for history right now. This episode is supposed to be teaching me something spiritual. And so, as an example, the person walking out of the city represents the evangelist leaving with the gospel, and the people opposing him represent the demons. That's what typology is. A lot of Protestants aren't used to typology, but this is very common in the fathers. And so a lot of people find that kind of scandalous that St. Maximus even made such an observation. And you could argue this, not like there's a consensus of saints that take that view of Scripture. And I feel that you could reconcile Scriptures on all sorts of matters. So it's like you're supposed to read them and take them at face value. That said, I'm not one of those people where, if St. Luke says 7 or 9 days they were walking from here to there, was it 7 or was it 9? I don't think the scriptures are always concerned explicitly with what the truth being communicated here must be reconciled according to different disciplines, whether it be science, history, this or that. Now, that doesn't mean it contradicts good science, history, this or that. But like a poem that says, beloved, your breasts are like gazelles leaping on the meadow. you got to use common sense. They're not literally gazelles. And so we have to read these things. And that's Song of Solomon, just so people know. Oh, no, they're going to chop that up. Help me, man. So the point is, we have to read the scriptures according to genre and what the spiritual point. And there are certain genres which aren't meant to be taken literal in some respects, like Song of Solomon. So I hope that makes that point.
Let's see. What is the single most compelling objection against Eastern Orthodoxy in your view, and what's your response to it? Thanks.
We actually kind of talked about that when you were Protestant. Because I said, when you get deep in the weeds, there's certain good objections that people don't talk about. I think one of them is the categorical loss of milk and honey in the initiatory rite in the church. I mean, that kind of sounds crazy, but it was once it appeared to me universal. And the typology of milk and honey, right? Like you're entering the land of milk and honey, of spiritual milk and honey in baptism and chrismation. It's weird in Orthodoxy, we retain so many things, and that is almost disappeared other than in Romania, where really in Romania, it appears to be a kind of, what's the term? A kind of reconstitution of it, and it's a little different. It's got a little bit of a different take to it. And so that's kind of big deal. We spoke about in a previous show on your channel, the change in ethos of Orthodox canon law, where someone said, is this a deal breaker? Or is this a foundational problem? And my answer is, I don't know. I can just tell you, this is what happened. And this is what has happened and happening in canon law. We don't have earlier precedents. And so it's sort of like, we don't know where we're going with this exactly. And so like, I'm not opposed to bringing this up, because what people shouldn't expect is everything is perfect with Orthodoxy right now at this moment, because the apostles didn't have everything perfect. They had to have a council in Jerusalem over the whole reception of Gentiles. So like, we believe that the correct doctrine church is preserved by the scriptures and by the consensus of the saints. And at any given moment, there's different varying levels of people screwing up. It's been like that in the beginning. It's like that now.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the canon law arguments that I posed earlier in my Protestant career. I think the answer for that was a incorrect reading I had of Saint Nicodemus and the Rudder, where I was reading the consequences of. I had read it as the consequences of not applying the canons, or I guess rejecting them outright, as forfeiting orthodoxy, but it was more along the lines of if you were to apply them in an immoral way. For instance, if you were to say like laymen can't marry or something, you were to just go completely in opposition to the canons and do something that was immoral in your application, completely contrary to the canons. So that would be kind of the answer to that response. And that was actually a pretty big hurdle that I had to overcome before I made the decision to, seek into the Orthodox Church. And I'm lucky and blessed, I guess blessed is the better word, to have people that I could talk to that knew anything about canon law. So, so it's kind of cool. All right. What is a good website to purchase icons? Had my first class for catechesis last night. Hey, congratulations.
Congratulations. My friend George is going to kill me because he's literally just started a website with this. And I forget the name of the website. I'm trying to find it right now. So no, George is, he actually made the cover of Rise and Fall of the Papacy. So one day, my family went to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and we wanted to go to the closest possible church on our way back home. So we were making our way through Pennsylvania, and we go to church, and it's just this unbelievable church, and it's like being back with the apostles and stuff. And afterwards, so I don't know. I walked into a church of Father Borjan, and apparently he's a big online influencer, the Live Saints and stuff like that. And I had no idea the person who made the cover of my book goes to this church. And and so I walked in just like, oh, I hope, thinking I'm walking this empty church because, it's, all these people that died out in the Northeast, and it's just bursting at the seams full of people. And And lo and behold, they all know who I am and stuff, which is sometimes kind of awkward, like you walk in and people are like,
It is
"Oh,
weird,
you're
yeah.
Craig Truglia." Like,
Yeah.
what happens to me, like when I'm in church, I'll introduce myself as Patrick, and because that's my name in church. And sometimes I'll notice when I see their look in their face, look disappointed all of a sudden, I go, "Oh, you might know me as Craig Truglia." So they think they see Craig Truglia, and when they hear Patrick, like, "Oh, he must just look similar." So
see, that's a good idea. I was thinking maybe when you have to pick the name or whatever, I was like, maybe I'll just find like a Saint Benjamin or something just to keep it easy. I need to do something different so I could do the same thing. There you go.
There you go. You can play the trick on people. If you could give me 30 seconds, you could maybe plug your Patreon. I'm going to see if I get that website for people. Let me just step aside for 1 second.
I don't have a Patreon, so that's easy. So
there you go. We'll plug whatever you want. Plug the mission in Cambodia.
There you go. Yeah, if you want to support the mission in Cambodia, you can find more on that on Craig's YouTube channel. I believe it's in the description of his YouTube channel. I might be able to add that to the live stream here. So
yes.
Let me see if there's any easy questions that I can.
OrthodoxChristianTheology.com/donate for more information. Consider becoming a missionary or support the mission work. And there you could get started. But let's find that icons.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll look for if there's anything addressed to me. Cleve, when will we start to see icons displayed behind you? I don't know. When I get some more icons, maybe. I don't know. I kind of like that.
You would have to revamp the whole studio. I like that on the background.
Yeah, I think this is
I got the website.
There you go.
Got the website. Theophanyworks.com.
There you go. Theophanyworks.
Theophanyworks.com. I know that they're making like kind of like these Christian, they sell lots of things. So it's like there's incense, there's Christian blankets. Again, they've got like Orthodox symbols and stuff on them. They're made in the United States. There's icons. They're doing prayer books. It's really exciting. And, knowing George personally, I'd say support George. Theophanyworks.com.
All right. So we've got about 7 minutes left on this stream. So I'll keep going through these questions as they're sent in. Question, Craig or Cleve, have you guys read John Barclay, Paul and the Gift, Paul and the Gift / Paul and the Power of Grace? I think it comes close to the EOU of justification and salvation through theosis.
I haven't read it, so I have no comment.
No, me neither. That's easy. Okay, so Casanthus sends a follow-up to his earlier question. He was talking about the Against the Donatist book. So he's actually talking about a completely different subject. He's saying, since it has primacy language, I guess, about the Bishop of Rome.
And yeah, and as we addressed, the idea there is to specify what is schismatic and what's not. And in St. Optata's view, all bishops that aren't schismatic are successors of Peter. So that includes Cyprian and himself, for that matter.
Craig, in a recent live stream, you held up 2 prayer books. One was tattered and one was black. What's the black one?
Well, the black one was the tattered one before it got tattered. Let me grab it real quick because I'm a big believer in this prayer book. 1 second. It is called Orthodox Daily Prayers. I know it's probably backwards, but Orthodox Daily Prayers, Hours, and Typica. It's based on a translation of from St. Tikhon's Press that doesn't exist anymore. And I memorized that translation. And so that's the translation I'm most comfortable with. I also think it's the most poetic without parsing the words in weird order. No offense to the translation. Some of them get pretty weird. And so it's hardcover too. You use a prayer book every day, they're going to get worn out. And so it's kind of pricey. It's like $50, $40 or $50, but it's I know it's not many books you use more than a prayer book. So that's one of them. There is a prayer book that's coming out soon by Vladika Alexei of Alaska. And it has like half of it is dedicated to how to use the prayer book, how to pray, what different prayer rules. It has a lot of shorter ones that are endorsed by saints, so which might be, some people might find the typical Jordanville and say Ticon's books very intimidating. And it gives like, well, here's some other prayer rules that maybe are a little less intimidating that are prescribed by saints. So that's something that, God willing, when that comes out, I will also make people more aware of. I have a PDF version now, but we will be making more information available that soon when it's published.
Cool. For Craig, I've been watching you defend icons on X, and you seem to be banging your head against the wall. They ignore every bit of evidence you give them. How do you persevere?
I don't know. I'm afraid like we're in a post-truth society. People don't weigh evidence. I have to hope that at least 1% of the population is actually listening, even when they disagree. Because then what are we doing? Because clearly they're not listening. They don't even admit they're wrong. They go from, there's no icons, they're not venerating icons until the 5th century, to like, oh, what I meant is like they don't kiss and do the hokey pokey and go through. It's like, no, that's not what you said. And everyone knows that's not what you said. It's like I've lost a lot of respect from some of these conversations, and how personal some, not all, but some people get over it when it's like, even if you disagree or you don't find it convincing, you go, wow, you brought a lot of different academic and actual primary sources I've never considered. I appreciate that. That's how I feel even when I disagree about something. But apparently I'm the only person in the world that's just not constantly trying to self-validate.
Well, you know what? You can take solace, because some of the discussions we had in that realm were convincing to me as a Protestant. And you can see where I'm at now. But I do agree with the frustration. Yeah,
You're special.
I do agree with the frustration, though, because especially like Kevin from Since 33 AD. What a mess. I mean, he's doing a video, I think, tonight. But his entire channel, I've noticed this, is like specifically just to ankle bite mine. I've like looked at his views, and I'm like, you don't get any views unless you make content with my face in your thumbnail. So, I mean, whatever. I noticed like it's like as soon as I became, so he was doing anti-Protestant apologetics when I was a Protestant. Then as soon as I made the announcement that I was going Orthodox, he's like, okay, now I'm going to shift to Orthodox, because otherwise I have nothing to make videos on. So it's just whatever Cleve's talking about for the week, that's what he's doing. So I don't know. I think it is a compliment.
I mean, maybe not. He did a video against a video of mine, and I felt that it was at least charitably done. I didn't agree with it. I thought there was major anthropological errors. And I even said, I'd be willing to have a discussion with you about, some of the anthropological presuppositions you're making. And I have to say, after this icon thing, it's like, you know what? The answer now would be no, because it's clear like someone's not listening. You have to at least listen, right? Like, just like, I don't pretend to know Thomism. I think he at least kind of is, everyone's like the pretend Thomist expert, right? But he's even more of an expert on it than I am, right? I would listen to what you have to say because I don't understand Thomism. So that's it's the problem is people aren't listening. And then when they don't listen, they just get angry because it's a replacement for listening. And I'm kind of getting old and frustrated with it. And it's, in some respects, you just have to hope there's someone out there listening.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on the show. Is there what do you want to plug before you head out?
Well, we already sort of plugged it, the mission in Cambodia. What is the point of going through videos like this ultimately if you're not going to become a missionary and bring that good news to someone else? But it could be local, it could be international. So people should pray and consider becoming a missionary if they're following this and they're not an inquirer. If you're an inquirer, this is way past you at the moment. All I could say is then I would plug my channel, Orthodox Christian Theology, something that helps you. Great. And otherwise you could support the mission work in Cambodia. Because I still tithe even as a catechumen, and however you want to give alms, one way you could do it, it's orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate.
I'll put that in the chat real quick. There you go. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I'll reach out. Maybe we'll do something on the PSA subject. That might be interesting.
Sounds fun.
All right. Have a good night. And thank you so much for watching. God bless.